Here we go, linear graphs, flipped lesson number 1. So today we're going to be looking at a linear equation, make a table, and then graph from that table. So here we go. I know that you did this in middle school where we picked a value for x and we plugged it in to find what y is. And usually your teacher would have you do -1, 0, and 1. Or maybe your teacher had you pick 1, 2, 3. I always like to pick a -1 to see what's going on that side. So step 1 for looking at an equation before you graph it is going to be to make a table and pick 3 values for x. Because x is independent, we can pick any values we want, but we want to keep them small so they're manageable and we can graph them, right? We don't want to pick 99 or 1002. So here we go. Once you pick your x's, step 2 is to take your x and plug it in where you see x. Now, some of you can do this in your head, right? You can plug in -1 and say 4 times -1 is -4. -4 minus 2 is -6, and you're done. But wonder if you really don't like doing math in your head because you'd rather trust a calculator. I totally get that. So let's do it a second way. So what we're going to do is we're going to write this side of the equation so that we can know what y is. So here we go. We see a 4, we write a 4. We see an x, we're going to plug in -1. We're always going to use parentheses. We see a minus, we write a minus. We see a 2, we write a 2. And we put exactly this into our calculator, including the parentheses. And when we hit enter, you'll see that we'll get -6. So then we can do the same thing with 0. We're going to take 0 and plug it in, and you have 2 choices, right? You could plug it in and do the math in your head. You could say 4 times 0 is 0. 0 minus 2 is -2. Or you could put it in the calculator. Either way is okay. Just depends on what your preference is. So once again, we'll do this side and hit enter to see what y is equal to when x is equal to 0. So we're going to rewrite the 4. When we see the x, we're going to plug in the 0. Minus 2, we're going to put all that into our calculator, hit enter, and we will get -2. So the reason why we do this process 3 times is it's easy to make a mistake, right? Because we're human. And if we made a mistake on just 2 points, we wouldn't know it. We'd graph those 2 points and make a line. That's why we need that 3rd point to make sure we didn't make a mistake on the other 2. So here we go. We're going to take the 1. We're going to plug it in for x to see what we get for y when x is equal to 1. If we do it in our head, we'll say 4 times 1 is 4, 4 minus 2 is 2, and we'll get 2. Or the second method is that we take this side and we plug, instead of when we see x, we plug in a 1 this time. We put the whole thing in our calculator, including the parentheses, and we hit enter, and we will get, oh my goodness, when we're plugging 1 in, yes, 4 minus 2 is 2. Whew, for a second there, thought I made a mistake. So yes, we've got now 3 points. When we look at, I know, how many colors can I put up here, right? When we see x is equal to -1 and y is equal to -6, we can rewrite that as a point, -1, -6. So this, in a table, means exactly the same thing as writing it this way. And we go to graph the point. We're going to remember that the first number that we see, let's see, I wish I had a 3rd color. Let's see, we'll switch to blue. The first number that we see is going to tell us where to go, either left or right. So to graph a point, we're going to start at the origin, and this tells us move -1. So we know -1 is to the left. Okay, we're not going to put a point there because we're not done yet. The point that we graph has 2 parts to it. One part tells us left, right, and the other part tells us up, down. So we start from the origin, we move to the left 1, and then -6 means go down 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this point is the same thing as -1, comma -6. And then we're going to do the same thing with our other 2 points, right? 0, -2 in a table is the same thing as writing 0, -2. And when we see that point, we know we start at the origin. We're going to move. Oh man, 0 means don't move, don't go left or right, just stay right at the origin. And the origin is right. This is the origin, which I'm going to erase because that's not a point. I mean, it's a point, but it's not a point on this line. And so this says don't move, but this says move down 2. So we're going to move down 2. There's our second point. Now, if we didn't graph a third point, we could connect these 2 dots because, right, that's all it takes. 2 points tells us where our line is. But if we made a mistake on one of those points, we're going to get the wrong line and we'll get it wrong on our test. We don't want to do that. So that's why we're going to do the third one. So 1, 2 on the table is the same thing as writing it as a point 1, 2. So we start at the origin. The 1 tells me move over to the right 1. The 2 tells me move up 2. And there you go. Then hopefully you have a ruler nearby, or you can use the side of a paper, or we all have a ruler in our planner, and we're going to connect, see if I can do it, connect all these points, and there we go. We've got the line. So hopefully you remember that from middle school, but we can't retain everything we learn, right? So a review is important. Now you'll notice you have a box to the right that says important to remember. And so what we want to do here is write some things down that are going to help us remember what we just did. The first thing is pick 3 different numbers for x and plug each in to find y. So that's a reminder. If you want to write it differently than I wrote it, write whatever you need to write to remind yourself anytime we graph by using a table. We're going to pick 3 points for x, and each of those points gets plugged into the equation, and then we know what y is for each of those x's. Another important thing to remember is that when we're graphing a point, we always start at the origin. Where's the origin? Right there. That's the origin. So we start there. I'm going to undo that. We start there, and we move to the left or right first, then up or down. So before we even write a point, before we're even allowed to say this is a point, we had to do 2 moves. We had to move to the left or right first, then up or down second, and then we finally get to write our point. And this is very important because we just finished a unit where we were doing a lot of slope, right? A lot of rate of change. And rate of change, to find that, is rise over run. Oh no. But to find a point, we're doing the opposite. So you just got to remember that. That's something you've got to memorize, that when you're graphing a point, it's the opposite of what you do to find the slope. So what we're going to do is we're going to practice that one more time, but we're going to do it a little bit quicker because I don't need to write all those things down. So here we go. What 3 points we're going to pick? That's right, -1, 0, and 1. And each time we're going to plug in. If I plug in a -1 and do it in my head, -3 times -1 is 3. 3 plus 1 is 4. Or I could have plugged it in, right? We know that's the option. We're still going to get 4 if we put that in our calculator. And then let's do it again. Let's plug 0 in. If we do it in our heads, -3 times 0 is 0. 0 plus 1 is 1. Or we could do it this way. Put in our calculator and hit enter. If you're putting it in your calculator, please pause me and so that you can make sure you're also getting a 1. And one last time, we're plugging in a 1. So -3 times 1 is -3. -3 plus 1 is -2. So here we go. We've got, what did I just say? -3 plus 1 is -2. And we could do it this way. And get the same thing in our calculator. And now it's time to graph. I know that -1, 4, -1 in the x column, 4 in the y column, that's the same thing as a point. So I'm going to go ahead and graph that. Over to the left one, up 1, 2, 3, 4. That's my first point. My second point is 0, 1. And my third point is 1, -2. Beautiful. All 3 are form a line. We're going to connect that. You guys have a ruler. I'm just going to try my best to hit all the points. All right, that wasn't my best, but hopefully with your ruler you did a better job. So what we just went over is important because even my pre-calc kids, if they don't know where to start with a graph and they're just looking at an equation, they start with a table. So a table is a really good tool to start understanding what a graph will look like when we see an equation. But now we're going to turn the sheet over and we're going to learn a new way to graph, because that table way will always work. But there are shortcuts that I think you'll enjoy more when an equation is in a certain form. So when an equation is in slope-intercept form, we talked about that last unit just for a second. When it's in that form, there's a really easy way to graph it. So what does a slope-intercept form look like? It looks like y equals mx plus b. You're like, wait a minute, why are we having an m and why are we having a b? We actually don't see the m and we don't see the b. You'll see a number here and you'll see a number here. But this equation tells you that whatever number you see in front of the x, that's always going to be your slope. Now we know that, right? We even tested over that last unit. And this is the part that we didn't talk about. The number at the very end that comes after the number and the slope and the x, this is the y-intercept. Now I know you're like, why did he pick b to represent the y-intercept? Well, they couldn't use y, right? So b, if you want to remember, the y-axis is straight up and down, right? And you're going to put a point on it. I don't know, that's the best I got. So b represents the y-intercept. So this is what it looks like when we're going to practice with it. Let's say we were given this equation, y equals 3x minus 5. So you don't see an m and you don't see a b, but you know that the number in front of the x is the m, and that's my slope. So we've got our slope. Once again, rate of change, we could use that, but since m, we're gonna talk about slope. Rate of change, same thing. And the number by itself over here, that's my y-intercept. My y-intercept is -5. So here's where the fun happens. Remember how we had to do a table and do all that stuff? If the equation is in this form, all we have to do is this. We say, well, what's my slope and what's my y-intercept? And then we're going to use this information to graph. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to find and put a point wherever the y-intercept is. So what does y-intercept mean? It means you look at the y-axis, right? This is the y-axis going up and down, and you find the point -5. So I'm going to start at the origin, count down 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I can put a point there. That is a point on this line. I didn't even have to make a table, and I found a point because I know that the y-intercept is equal to -5. All right, so the y-intercept is whatever point is on the y-axis in a line. And then I'm going to use this second part, this slope. So the slope gives me the information for how to get from one corner point to another corner point. There are billions and trillions of points in every line, but there are only a certain amount of corner points, right? Because, well, the corner points that we can see when looking at a graph. So this tells me how to get to my next one. And I know what you're thinking. You're like, no, Miss Overby, this just says 3. We need a rise and a run. And you're right. The rise is 3. What do you think our run's going to be? And I can hear it. It's 1, because 3 over 1 is the same thing as 3. We want to write it as 3 over 1 when we're graphing, so it helps us. So to find our next point, we're going to go back to this y-intercept we have here, and we're going to go up 3, 1, 2, 3, over 1, and we found our second point. We're only going to graph 2 points, the y-intercept and the second point we graphed from finding the slope. We're going to connect those two, and we're done. All right, so we're going to need to practice this, right? So here we go. When we look at this, the first thing we're going to say is it in slope-intercept form? In fact, I could write this right above it and go, oh, it is, okay? I could even, if I was going to write it above it, I could even tell that my slope is 2 because it's in the slope place. And why are we using M for slope? Well, we can't use S. It looks like a 5. I think that's confusing. But remember, like with mountaintops, like the slopes of a mountaintop? I don't know. That's what they always taught us in middle school, right? So the slope is 2, and the y-intercept is 3. And so I'm going to notice that, see that plus? That reminds me that the 3 is positive. So here we go. Step 1 is graph the y-intercept. So we're going to find the y-axis, that's the axis going up and down. We're going to go up to 3. 1, 2, 3. We're halfway done. Then we're going to use the fact that the slope is 2. That gives us the information for how to find the next point. So once again, great, we've got our rise. If they don't give us our run, we've got to give it to ourselves. We always run at least one. There's never a run 0. Okay, something's wrong if you're running 0. So here we go. We're going to rise up 2. We're going to run 1. That gives us our second point. So once again, I want you to take this in. You can use a table to graph, but when you know shortcuts, we're going to go using the shortcut. And also because this shortcut involves important concepts like y-intercept and slope, it's important for us to become really good at this method. So let's practice it again. Here, if we write y equals mx plus b above it, we can remind ourselves that the slope is -4. Now we've got to be really careful because the b, that negative, goes with the 2. So our y-intercept is -2. So remember, step 1, we're always going to plot b. Okay, plot the y-intercept. So here we go. This is the y-axis. We know the origin's right in the middle of the graph right here, but I'm going to erase that because that's not part of our graph. So we're going to start there. We're going to move down 2, 1, 2. We're going to put our dot there. That's our y-intercept. And then our slope. So step 2 is find the second point using the slope. And we've learned that if the slope just has one part to it, that's our rise, and we have to put a 1 underneath. Because if we put -4 divided by 1 in our calculator and hit enter, we get -4. So we're just writing it in this way so that it reminds us that we have a rise and a run. So to find the next point on this line, I'm going to go back to this y-intercept point, and I'm going to rise. Oh no, rise -4? All right, sometimes we fall. We're still going to say rise. So -4 means move down 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Don't put your dot yet because we got to run. We got to run over 1. And then we notice for the first time today, when we connect these two lines, we just made, oh man, I missed the point. Hopefully you used your ruler and you didn't miss the other point. Hopefully we noticed, oh, the line has a negative slope, which makes sense, right? Because the original equation had that -4. All right, let's practice another one. So if you like this method of writing y equals mx plus b above it, that's a good one to use, right? Some people don't need that method, and other people are like, oh, that's great, let's use that. So we know our slope is 2/3, and our y-intercept is a +4. So step 1, look at the y-axis, find the 4. I know we don't have numbers, but we know where the origin is, so we go up 1, 2, 3, 4. Put our dot on 4 to find our second point. Step 2 is using the slope. Oh my goodness, look what we have. Usually we're like, oh, fractions are such a pain. Well, when your slope is a fraction, it's a gift. It's not a pain at all. It's the opposite of a pain. Because when your slope is a fraction, we're given both the rise and the run. We don't have to waste our time putting a 1 underneath. So here we go. We're going to rise up. We're going to start from the point we just plotted. We're going to rise up 2, and we're going to run 3. 1, 2, 3. There's our second point. Connect the two dots. Oh, did you notice something? I wanted to talk real quickly. Let's go back. Some people say, I got these two dots. I'm just going to connect them here. All right. If you did that, that's a line segment. And we're really drawing something that's a line that goes on forever on both sides. So you want to make sure if you're doing that, you want to pause this video and go back to all of them. Make sure your line has an arrow that indicates, on both sides, that indicates that this line goes on forever as it's moving to the right and as it's moving to the left. Okay? And let's practice one more. Let's go ahead and do our y equals mx plus b above it. If that's helping you, continue doing that. Once again, we're gifted with a fraction for slope And be careful, the b is a -1. So we start there. Our y-intercept is a -1. The slope tells us where to go. It says our rise is a -3, so we're falling, not rising. We're going to go down 3, 1, 2, 3, and we're going to run 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. We're going to connect these two dots, and this is the line that represents the equation we started with. So fun! You guys made it through. We're going to practice a lot in class. Thank you for being such good students with these flip lessons. I can tell that they're really helping. So thanks for joining me, and I will see you in class.